Uh, Short answer is yes, absolutely. It's deliberate. It strikes me, it's interesting. That's the difference between literature and genre fiction. Genre fiction seeks to comfort your view of the world. So you read a Harlequin romance not so that your world is rocked, but so that your world is confirmed, that, love will triumph. Genre fiction confirms our vision of the world. Literature, the greatness of literature, is that it is supposed to jar you somewhat. It is supposed to, hopefully, if it's a successful work of fiction, make you see the world slightly differently. And so that implies that if you've changed, that you needed to change, that there was something there that was too settled. So I do believe in art, to some extent, being upsetting, to art objecting to your view of the world and asking it to change. So it's not that I therefore seek to shock. I don't think there's anything particularly, well, there's the odd elements that are shocking in Life of Pi, although curiously enough, people never mention it. I remember it always struck me how people objected or noted the violence done to the animals. The poor zebra gets its stomach ripped open by the hyena, and people really felt for the zebra. And I always thought, well, what about in the second story? The mother gets stabbed and she gets beheaded. And somehow no one mentioned that. Clearly we feel more for the suffering of animals than the suffering of human beings, curiously enough. But I do believe that, that literature should upset you and should make you see the world in a different way. And it's not that it's not a question of shocking the bourgeois, but it is presenting a different view of the world. That's in fact one of the reasons I've chosen a second time to write a novel that touches on religious faith, in part because we've completely lost faith in faith. We live in such a secular society, and in many ways, my life is 95% secular. I completely agree with the triumphs of rationality over the obscurantism of organized religion. Organized religion has done and continues to do heinous offenses to the human spirit. Nonetheless, there's a kind of magical thinking involved in religious faith that I think is a necessary element of our humanity. What distinguishes us from animals is faith. Not just religious faith, of course, but romantic faith, political faith. Any act of faith is an intensely human activity, and we can't do without it. And the only reason I've become interested in religious faith is precisely because it's so marginalized, precisely because it's so demonized, precisely because it goes so much in the face of all the triumphs of rationality. I'm still gobsmacked that people believe in gods. Considering the power of the vaccination and the computer, how can you honestly still believe in Allah or Jesus or Buddha? How can you believe this nonsense? And people still do. And it interests me now. And not in a sort of cynical way. I'm intrigued that people can still have the capacity to believe these stories in such a way that it actually transforms their view of the world. It can be an extraordinarily powerful thing and a very subtle one. We tend to know the sort of the Monty Python version of organized religion, of religious thinking. It actually, like great literature, can also be a repository of extraordinary subtle thinking. And that's what I've sort of become interested in. And it's in part, once again, to jar. So in the High Mountains of Portugal, which is very broadly an allegory on the life of Jesus, each of the three sections, I based it on the Gospel according to Mark. I based it on that. Now, I've told you this now. If I didn't, you probably wouldn't notice it. But if you remember at one point, there's the woman who's been hemorrhaging for 12 years, and she touches Jesus. She touches the hem of his clothing. And because of that, she's instantly healed. And Jesus' reaction is to turn around and say, "Who touched me? Who touched me?" And she says, "I did, Lord." And he talks to her and he forgives her and all that. There's a scene in the novel in which Thomas, the character in the first novel, asks the same question, "Who touched me? Who touched me?" That's directly linked to Mark. There's many, many instances in all three parts that are linked to the Gospel according to Mark. I chose that one because it's the oldest Gospel and the shortest. I was creating this broad parallel. The reason I do that is precisely because we live in an age now, despite the fact that the Jesus event was the foundational event in Western civilization, and it has many ways forms us, and many of it has formed us in bad ways, but it still remains part of our identity. And it's so marginalized now, I've become interested in it because it's still central. And I hope it's jarring in that sense, the religiosity of it. Even though it has nothing to do with organized religion, I'm still hoping that something about that will jar people, precisely because we live in such a secular age.
Claudia, I'll give you a shot at that question. Do you use discomfort in any way deliberately, let's say provocatively, in the novel?
I can't really find purchase in that question, so I'm going to respond a little bit.
You can always answer something else.
I will. I'm going to respond a little to what Yann was saying. One of the things I think our work shares is a interest, a magnetism towards mystery. For me, the natural world is where I go to find the sacred, and the sacred is very important to me in life. That feeling of something that is sacred. I think that religious sensibility is hardwired into us. I don't think we have a choice, even if we're atheists. There is a part of our consciousness that transcends our day-to-day reality. And what religion and literature have so profoundly in common, and what your novel, the new novel, really expands on, is the thinking metaphorically about life and meaning. Because religion at its best it gives us some of the most powerful metaphors for what the meaning of our lives are. And literature at its best does exactly the same thing.